Hello everybody, welcome back to more Art of War, Hell Hath No Fury. We're up to chapter 7 now. In the previous chapter we left Martha exploring the house of Rebecca Patterson, but we're just going to dart back over to Amanda. So I'm going to just jump right back in with chapter 7. Sebastian Sampson's lounge was so sparsely decorated it could have been easily mistaken for a show home. The only element of true luxury came in the form of a big fluffy white rug thrown down on the dark wood floor, like a snowy patch in the middle of the barren room, surrounded by furniture. 2 lovely upholstered armchairs, a matching plush sofa. Aside from that and the fire, a marbled fireplace, the roaring pyre built within from wood that spent its purgatory piled up in an immaculately symmetrical heap next to the hearth, there were no real personal touches to be seen. Like its owner lived a sparse, frugal life, contrary to the size of the property, enjoying minimal comforts. In spite of this, Amanda found herself relaxing into the sofa that she had chosen to sit down on. It was quite an odd sensation to feel so at home in a place that wasn't her own. However, she found herself trusting Sebastian, feeling comfortably at ease within his presence. Maybe it was because Joe was by her side, slouched down next to her, his hand wrapped around hers as if it were imperative to him to ease some of the anxiety that she might experience. Or maybe it was simply that she'd been feeling so adrift, homeless under her own inability to go back and spend any notable time within the house that she had lived in her whole life. She'd been back there, only to collect a few belongings to take to Joe's, returning later for more stuff. A slow, painful exodus from the life she'd once known. Astonishingly astute, Sebastian gently said. Joseph has confided in me about your recent loss. You have my utmost condolences, and I apologise if I appear disrespectful in asking this, but he told me that you believe you witnessed your father's death in a dream. Is that true? Not believe. She did see it, Joe corrected him. Before Amanda could find the words to reply, her gut reacting to the statements in a way that was still much too viscerally charged to be healthy. Just before it happened. Of course, I do not doubt the veracity of such a claim. He gazed between the young couple, seeming to chastise himself with a quick wobble of his balding head. It's common for a talented telepath to develop additional clairvoyant tendencies. Precognition, like many psychic abilities, however, can be devastating when it first develops, perhaps more so because of the inherent nature of how it presents itself, with the event often occurring before the receiver of the warning can accurately interpret it. I cannot sit here and tell you with any sense of authority that there was anything that you could have done to prevent what happened to your father, Miss Ford. It would be cruel, unethical, and I am not all-knowing, despite what some might avidly claim. A teary sob of laughter choked up in Amanda's throat as she fought not to start crying in earnest. It was difficult. The subject still too hard to talk about. But it was reassuring to have somebody knowledgeable attempt to make her feel less awful about what she'd experienced. She'd needed that, much more than she realised. Precognition, whether it comes in visions or a mere gut feeling, is far more common than you might think, Sebastian continued. Most have an innate sense of incoming danger, a part of the human brain that we haven't fully tapped into as a species. Most definitely can detect or decipher impending doom. Something within us all that tells us not to touch a roaring fire even if we've never personally been burned. It is natural, a survival instinct humans have somehow forgotten to evolve. It hadn't felt natural, Amanda thought to herself glumly. Death had been very cruel in the way it had come calling to the Ford estate, making its presence felt, in an assault that could never ever have been prevented, no matter what Amanda's ability nastily suggested to her. Even if she'd been able to reach her father's study in time to stop him summoning the monster that killed him, Amanda knew deep down that she would only have prevented the inevitable. For all of his inexperience and dark plotting, her father wasn't a foolish man. His ego had gotten him killed, and he wouldn't have stopped at the first failed attempt to try and absolve himself of the sins that he may have committed in the past. He was too stubborn. He would have found his way to that demon eventually. He would have used the magic that he procured and would have summoned a monster into their home, and he still would have died. Amanda would have lost her father. It was sadly inevitable. Logically, she knew this, yet it still cut her very deep. There was no logic in grief, and the emotions she was experiencing were so raw that they were beginning to affect more than her recovery from the loss that she felt. She was floundering, sinking in all aspects of her world, no matter how she tried to keep her head above the surface, or who was there to add their buoyancy to her own, so inevitably she swallowed down water. I can see your struggle, Sebastian noted kindly. It's made you doubt your ability to cope with your flourishing powers. It's not too difficult. If it's not too difficult, it would be advantageous of me to be able to better understand your fears. Which felt like a convoluted, if considering, way of asking her exactly what the problem was, how he could help her. In a small, shaking voice, Amanda confessed, "I'm frightened of what happens next." What happens next here, or in general? "I'm frightened of losing more people I love," she said, swallowing down the lump in her throat. "Of knowing or seeing that they're in danger and not being able to do anything to stop it. Like with my dad, I can't." Holding up a hand, Sebastian gently reassured her. "You needn't. But you've suffered a terrible loss, Miss Ford. One anybody would struggle to get over. That it came coupled with an evolution of your psychic talents is undeniably cruel. But the two things do not have to be linked so intrinsically to one another. Your father's death might have been the catalyst to spark the metaphysical shift within you, something that had been lingering close to the surface already, sinking away to come forth." He shook his head firmly. "This is also extremely common, as are the feelings of fear and anxiety that can follow a tragedy. You are clearly in a state of emotional flux. Can you tell me if you're having visions regarding your worries? Are they tangible?" Amanda closed her eyes and tried to stop her mind from going to where it inevitably went, memory, sparked by a trigger. Though it stuck in her throat, threatened to choke her up, she confessed, "I've had dreams." "You've had more dreams, like the one with your late father?" "Yes." "No." She shook her head, desperately unsure. I don't know what they are. They could be, but maybe it's natural, part of the grief because of what happened. That would be logical, right? That can happen." Sebastian didn't try to reassure her, instead asking, "What do you think?" "In my head it seems logical that this is part of the grieving process. But in my heart, I'm so scared that something's coming after the people I love. Something awful, something that's going to take them all." Almost on instinct, Amanda turned her head to look at her boyfriend, who secured his hold on her hand as if he understood and wanted her to know that he was there, to support her, but it didn't halt her fears. Joe had told her many times about the nature of his work within the Marytown Paranormal Investigation Agency, an inherently dangerous vocation, putting him in contact with all sorts of metaphysical monsters. Though he took every possible precaution, their investigations were fraught with hidden peril, and at any given moment they could be pulled into a battle for survival. It was hard, sitting on the sidelines, a bystander to such a potentially dangerous career. After her father's death, it had become to feel impossible to endure, impossible to compartmentalise. Amanda felt like she could easily drown in the anxiety that she felt every single time Joe kissed her goodbye and headed out for his shift. Even if she knew he was going to be in the office for the whole day that he was gone, she could live happily forever in the moment he returned, 24 hours later, sleepy, sometimes grumpy and always hungry. But at that moment, he was safe, and she knew that he wasn't lost to her. It wasn't healthy, and Joe wasn't the only person that she feared for. Now that she had a family member who she knew lived a dangerous life, the anxiety had spread its poison towards Martha, to her sister who she'd only just gotten back, and her mother who was safe somewhere far away with her new supernatural stepfather, out of sight and out of contact. To Sebastian she said, "I need to know for certain if this is grief, or if it's part of my new ability. If it is, I need to be able to understand it." "Of course," the ever-perceptive adept agreed. "There are things that we can do here together in safety to help you. If you like, I can show you a technique that will allow you to remain conscious while you're within the dream state, enable you to mentally explore your visions, have control." Feeling a rush of palpable relief, Amanda responded, "Anything." "I cannot promise that this will grant you the answers you seek, Miss Ford, but it will give you a sense of power over what you currently fear most. A way to examine what your subconscious is trying to tell you when you have these dreams. Something I think would be useful to you, no?" He smiled eloquently. "What do you think? Would you like to try and learn such a technique? I see no reason that we cannot start right away." She swallowed, nervously shifting her gaze between her boyfriend and his psychic master, feeling like this ought to be a thing she considered for more than a fleeting moment before jumping right in feet first. Neither appeared inclined to give her the right answer, however. She had to choose her path, take control of her own destiny and her dreams. Nodding, she decided, "Yes, I think I'd like to do that." Rising rather jubilantly to his feet, Sebastian declared, "Wonderful. From next to her, Joe let out a sigh that was brimming with relief, as if his chest had been tight with worry, and he'd been carefully masking it from her so that she could talk to Sebastian. That she had chosen to accept his help pleased him, which made Amanda feel like she'd chosen well. From across the room, Sebastian said, "Joseph, I shall require some help to prepare in the kitchen when you have a moment. There's no rush." He left the two of them alone, clearly giving them some space. Almost immediately, Joe drew Amanda into his side for a cuddle, and she went because she felt like she needed to be there. This man was the other half of her soul, and she knew that he suffered, that he felt her pain as acutely as if it were his own, and while he would never complain about it, the relief that he now felt was so palpable that it exposed how worried he'd been. He wanted to make things better for her, to help her heal. As she extricated herself from the sanctuary of his shoulder, his hands found her face, gently cupping it like he would kiss her. But he didn't immediately press his lips to hers. Against her mouth he said, "Thank you for trusting in me, for trusting in him, and in me. This will be good for you." "I hope so," she said, meaning every word. Joe kissed her, a long lingering private token of his affection, one that warmed her down right down to her socks, made her smile contentedly, made her temporarily forget where she was and almost all of her problems. Still, as he inched back, she pleaded, "Tell me it's going to be okay." He hesitated. "You hate me telling you that." "Tell me it now," she urged. "Tell me it now and I'll believe you." With another kiss, he looked dubious, but he gave in and told her, "It's going to be okay. Trust me, this is going to be fine." Amanda nodded, smiled, said, "I'm choosing to accept that as gospel." And he grinned, that big infectious smile she'd fallen so in love with. Because he couldn't help himself. She'd broken him down and made him laugh, and if that could happen, then she knew that everything would be okay. Tracing both of his thumbs across her cheeks, he made another vow, one that she hadn't demanded but should have been expecting. "I won't let anything happen to you that you won't be able to handle. You know that." Deep in her heart, she tested. "I know that." "I'll be right here with you every step of the way." "I know that too." He smiled, shook his head, emphatically declared, "God, I love you." "You'd better." After he left to help Sebastian in the kitchen, Amanda sank into the sofa, her hands curled in her lap as she attempted to relax. She was safe here. She trusted Joe to keep his word and look out for her. She trusted that his adept knew what he was talking about and that he could show her how to take control, empower her to tackle the wasteland of her world. A technique to master her dreams would be extremely useful, a way to decipher what she was being shown. It felt like somebody had handed her a miracle, one that she wasn't sure she deserved, but she was going to grasp it with both hands and all the courage she could muster. Because Joe assured her that everything was going to be okay, and she wanted to believe, to take it as gospel. One of the most incredible people that she knew believed in her, and all she could accomplish, had responded to her faith in him and the one person in the world who he held in higher esteem than her, with love and support. There had to be some divine blessings left over for her. Everything was going to be all right. It had to be. When her metaphysical guides returned, Joe was carefully carrying a small tray, which held one glass, a whiskey tumbler that had been filled to the brim with a gold liquid that could have been alcohol or diluted apple juice, judging by the colour. Out of curiosity, Amanda asked, "Is that for me?" Doing his best impression of a suave waiter, he bowed, "Ma'am?" "I've prepared an elixir for you to consume," Sebastian answered her question, ignoring his young protégé's attempt at goofiness. "It's a homemade tonic, brewed from a low-alcohol grappa which will act as a mild sedative to relax your body while leaving your mind clear and alert. You should be able to dream whilst retaining control of your visions." "We're going to attempt this now?" she asked, unsure. "In here? This room makes you comfortable, no?" "No," she answered, attention focused on Joe, as he set down the tray on the table before her, before realising what she might have said and correcting her mistake. "I mean, yes, you have a lovely home." "Thank you," the adept replied graciously. "When you've practised the art for as long as I have, surroundings bear little importance. However, I must still confess that I do feel much more at home in my kitchen or perhaps my garden. Rarely do I ever use this space." Which felt like a shame. It was a very comfortable lounge. Joe picked up the tumbler of elixir and held it out to Amanda, who found herself nervously swallowing, unsure if she should accept it on good faith in which it was being presented to her. Of course, she trusted her boyfriend implicitly, but it was hard not to be overly cautious, to still be anxious. To put her ease, he explained, there are herbs infused into the grapple that will help you relax. It's all natural, all perfect for enhancing psychic potential. I watched him make it, Amanda. You'll be fine drinking it. Okay, she nodded, giving now what felt like informed consent. Taking the glass, she downed the golden liquid before she could think herself out of it, wincing ever so slightly at the minor taste of alcohol that remained in the concoction, however minimal. Like most psychics she knew, Amanda rarely drank, preferring to keep a clear head. Tempting as it was at times, she'd learned the perils of binge drinking whilst being telepathic at university, and it was one of the lessons from that time she was unlikely to ever repeat. From over her boyfriend's shoulder, Sebastian spoke. I shall copy down the recipe for Joseph to take home with you, along with some extra potions and balms that you can use to aid sleep and relieve from stress. It's very kind, thank you. You're quite welcome. He smiled, seeming eager. Shall we start? Somewhat reluctantly, Amanda handed the empty tumbler back to Jo so that she could follow Sebastian's instructions and remove the outer layers of her clothing, make herself comfortable. When she took her place lying down on the sumptuous white rug in the middle of the room, she was dressed only in her jeans and a vest. Jo worked around her, laying down some candles and crystals in a precise circular pattern that probably had some significant meaning but only served to make her feel like she was about to be sacrificed to an ancient god on the promise of eternal riches or immortal life or something like that. Trying not to sound too amused, Jo whispered, "Oh, don't tempt me," which prompted Sebastian to feel the need to wearily explain what was happening. It's a protection circle, Miss Ford, he said, to prevent anything that you might encounter in your dream state from potentially crossing over into our realm and becoming a danger to yourself or to us. That's a possibility, she asked, suddenly scared of the precaution that she hadn't even considered would be necessary. A horrifying one. Anything is possible, he said. I've learned not to tempt such things. Which was not the comforting reassurance she'd been seeking. For what felt like the 10th time, Jo softly urged her, "Don't be afraid." Which was something that Amanda felt was easier said than done. Once the preparations were complete, the younger psychic sat down on the sofa that he and his girlfriend had been cuddling on, and Amanda could no longer see him, which she didn't much like. She didn't want to do this on her own. She didn't want to be so far away from him, to feel so vulnerable. What felt like only a few seconds later, she felt him move so that he was now kneeling somewhere behind her shoulders, closer, better. She could feel if not see him, but she was tempted to physically reach out. I'd advise against that. Sebastian spoke, sounding sterner than she'd heard him thus far. Physical contact like that might have consequences that I cannot prepare for. Fair enough, Amanda conceded, accepting the disappointment, though it made her feel vulnerable again, and very alone. You're not alone, Miss Ford, Sebastian assured her. We shall both be here every step of the way. I simply need you to relax and clear your mind. Again, much easier said than done. The notion of falling asleep, of dreaming, terrified Amanda, which was understandable given what had happened the last time she truly felt like she was safe, given the violence and the tragedy that had followed it. She didn't want to dream, no matter how much she might need to. Rather than get frustrated with her, Sebastian Sampson seemed to be the most patient man who'd ever graced the world. He simply spoke to her in kind, encouraging tones, reminding her that she was in control and that nothing was going to happen to her that she was ill-prepared for. She was safe, she was protected. They could stop this at any time. Everything was all right. No, the hindrance that she experienced was all her own. Shaking her head, she confessed, I don't think I can do this. Attempting to encourage her, Jo asserted, You can. What's going to happen to me? Sebastian fielded this question, telling her, if you can relax and permit the elixir to do its job, you'll be taken to a neutral place to start the dream, somewhere that you feel safe, that isn't home. Here, you'll be open and ready for any metaphysical wavelengths that may have a pressing urgency to make contact with you. You may accept or reject them. Shaking her head, Amanda felt baffled. How do I do that? You'll see. Relax. It will be that simple. No offence to the adept, but it didn't feel like it would. It wasn't simply her inability to relax. This felt wrong somehow. Amanda couldn't put her finger on why or how, but it did. Hey, do you want to stop? Try this another time, Jo asked, his voice a soothing presence that she wished she could lose all of it. She wished she could lose all of her reluctances. Firmly, she shook her head, stated, No. Are you sure? I'm sure. I just need to know that you're here, looking after me. I'm right here. She almost felt him smile. I can't touch you, but I'm right here. I'll keep talking to you if that helps, and you know what? If you ever want to try this again at home, I'll be right there too. I'm going nowhere, Amanda. I'm here, okay? You can do this. I believe in you. Drawing in some deep breaths, she tried to let his words sink in, to hold on to them, to make them real and tangible. He was right there. It was okay. She could do this. She knew that she could, believed in herself. Joe decided to take over, instructing and coaching her through the first part of the ritual, a sacrifice his adept didn't seem to mind making. Hearing his voice helped Amanda. It helped a lot. It was much nicer than the voice of a strange old man she barely even knew, no offence to Sebastian, but this was the voice of the man who loved her. The voice that within minutes of meeting her for the first time had arrogantly declared that he was going to be the best thing that ever happened to her. The voice that whispered so many sweet, lovely things into her ear, coaxing, urging her to fall head over shoelaces in love with him. Good, he complimented. Yeah, that's good. That's my girl. Things like that. Oh, you've got this, he boasted. I'm so proud of you. That statement made her smile, made her feel sleepy, made her feel like she was starting to sink into the rug beneath her like a fluffy, soft cloud. Joe's voice became lilting, dreamlike. An ethereal distance began to form in the physical space between them, but it didn't make Amanda panic. This time she went along with it, allowed it to soothe her, to coax her. She relaxed, deeper and deeper, getting sleepier and sleepier. So warm, so safe. Like the last line of determined defence, a spike of anxiety speared through her stomach and made her hesitate. Jerked her out of a relaxation with the type of abruptness that made her feel like she was about to fall out of bed. No, she couldn't do this. She wasn't going to be able to. It wasn't safe. A voice halted her impending rush of panic. Amanda. Joe, she responded, a whisper, her brow furrowing in confusion. You're not afraid. But I am. No, he said firmly. Your dreams cannot hurt you. It's in your mind, and you're in control. You want to do this, remember. You can do this. Sleepily she nodded, and felt herself begin to relax again. Listening to the sounds of her heart beating, she focused on her breathing and the subtle energies of the other people in the room with her, two vastly different, though they carried similar markers, a common bond that merged them. The more powerful one Amanda found herself avoiding. She was sure its owner was a very nice man and didn't mean her any harm, but she was alone and vulnerable, so she went immediately to the second energy signature, the one she knew, the one she loved, the one that loved her in return and shared a connection with her like none she'd ever felt. Metaphysically wrapping the energy around herself like a security blanket, Amanda ventured forwards, her ears prickling at the sounds of low, humming chants, words being spoken in a language she'd never learned, but she seemed to be able to understand their intention, to soothe her, to draw her inwards, and they did. Until she felt like she was falling right through that cloud, she sank finally at peace, into her psyche, into her mind, where she landed alone, but unafraid, on a barren plain that seemed to spread as far as the eye could perceive, a neutral place where she might be able to confront the nightmares that had plagued her, face to face on even ground, so that she could begin to control them, move forward, begin to live again. As the dream started to take form, Amanda became aware of the changes that were taking shape around her. The ground under her bare feet split open, roots sprouted from the arid sun-baked dirt. A resplendent red evening dress revealed itself, covering her nudity, its snug bodice hugging her figure in a way that accentuated curves Amanda wasn't convinced she'd ever possessed in real life. An ample cleavage, a flare of hips, bound by luxurious satin fabric that felt unfamiliar. Her blonde hair was scooped up and affixed in an artful pile of tresses atop her head by an elegant silver antique brocade. Beautiful. She felt stylish, like a movie star, like a woman who dressed for her inner confidence. The sprouting roots grew up all around her, blossoming as they rose and thickened into the thick trunks of magnificent trees, reaching for the star-speckled sky like thick arms. The ashen dirt hardened, formed a base of stone, smooth beneath her feet, still bare, forming a hilltop she seemed to be standing on the summit of, a familiar hilltop, somewhere she knew. The view that formed from the vista was as breathtaking as it had always been, especially at night when the twinkling lights of the small town that was nestled in the valley called to her, trying to beckon her onwards towards the place that she'd always known as home. But it was a call that Amanda strangely resisted, as a cold wind began to build up around her, ruffling her hair and the long skirts of her gown. Her home was no longer neutral. It was where the very worst thing had happened. She wasn't going back there. Goosebumps began to prickle on the flesh of her arms. She ran her hands over them, attempting to warm them away as she glanced about and tried to pinpoint what was going to happen next, so that she could remain in control ahead of it. Fear began to unfurl anew in her tummy, and even though she tried to tell herself that she was going to be fine, she began to feel unsafe, like this had been a terrible mistake, and she'd fallen into a trap. Shadows began to form on the sandstone that decorated the hilltop, every single one of them a monster that had no shape for her to decipher. She sensed them, however, could feel their malice, their hunger for the prey that she posed to their wickedness. A toy for evil games they liked to play, games that human women never survived, except for that one time. But she hadn't been human, had she? No, she'd not been human. Still, what fun they'd had. Amanda took her hands up to her ears, pressing them tightly to attempt to drown out the horrific murmurings. She didn't want to hear such things, and she didn't have to. She was in control here. She wasn't afraid of these monsters. Focusing hard, she demanded that they vacate the hilltop and her dream, and to her surprise, they went, scattering off into the wind that still gusted around her as if what they feared most of all was being challenged. They were cowards, brave in numbers, but afraid of any true power. Her dream didn't end there, however. It wasn't so simple. The thing that had plagued her recent nightmares had yet to reveal itself, and she sensed it was close, that it was waiting for the right time to strike her down. Branches of the surrounding trees stretched out towards her, reaching across the hilltop like bony fingers of the long-time dead, seeking retribution for an end that had befallen them, an end that she hadn't caused, but they held her responsible for nevertheless, eager to slash her open, split her skin, leave her to bleed on the hard ground, to end her blatant defiance. As they drew closer, Amanda searched for the fortitude within herself to will them away, reject their threat as she had the whispers, and stand in the face of evil that commanded them to strike and kill, for they were merely puppets. The power behind them was a true menace, a laughter on the wind. She heard the tones of joyous evil. Amanda felt accomplished. As she heard the tones of joyous evil, Amanda felt accomplished, as she had succeeded in drawing out the thing that had been holding her psychic and emotional well-being hostage for so many weeks. It was this fiend, lurking in the distance, a phantom that danced enticingly over the land that lay below where Amanda was standing, waiting for this confrontation. But suddenly the ground began to shake beneath her feet, and the laughter recoiled, retreated. The last of the skeletal branches slunk back away into the shadows that had once been brave enough to try their wicked hands. All of the evil that permeated this place, and there was a lot of it, collectively withdrew in fear and respect, in reverence to what they could sense was coming. For it was worse than all of them combined, worse than anything. A loud crash that sounded like a felled tree made Amanda jerk her face in the direction of the furthest forest entrance to the hilltop. In a gap between two splintered trunks stood a form, a huge, dark, menacing form. A set of hard eyes locked with her own, set into a snarling face. Amanda knew those eyes. She couldn't for the life of her identify how she knew the monster that owned them, but she knew them, and she knew that this was a beast that she wasn't adept enough to banish. But she'd tried many times and she'd failed. The fiend was inside her, somehow a part of her. She felt its animosity as surely as she felt its evil. It was unbeatable. Doing the only thing that seemed logical to her in the moment, Amanda picked up the long skirts of her gowns and she ran, bare soles slapping hard on the sandstone rock as she broke for the opposite line of trees. She didn't need to feel the ground quake as her monster gave chase, because she knew that she'd known that he would, knew that he was never going to let her escape, not now that he had her in his sights. He was never going to stop. A deafening growl split the air, a bellow of sheer anger. Amanda dug down deeper, diving into the waiting arms of the army that had once again become the monsters that she'd been fooled into believing had fled from their threat. Skeletal arms formed sharp, taloned hands that frantically clawed at her, finding flesh, slashing her open in a wild frenzy of violence that tore at her skin as if it were the same thin material of the ruined satin of her gown. The pain was instant, intense, and almost completely overwhelming. The scenery around her began to transition again, and at this time the seamlessly flowing forth, the shift was an abrupt, violent change, and Amanda found herself falling towards the ground, the palms of her hands slapping hard on flooring tiles that were far too familiar, that the sight of them offered no relief. She wasn't supposed to be there. This was no longer neutral territory. It couldn't be safe. Death had come, destroyed her world. It would come again, and this time she would join her father. As the trappings of her familial childhood home sprang up around her from the pristine eggshell-painted walls to the high-vaulted ceiling, she tried to flee from what she knew would still be pursuing her. But it was hard, next to impossible. She was injured, perhaps mortally so. Her chest burned as she began to choke on a liquid that seemed to have formed in her lungs, thick as treacle and twice as disgusting. Her wounds bled and left a trail behind her as she painfully tried to crawl away, drawing her killer in to locate her, hunt her like the prey that she was to him. The doorway of her late father's ground floor galleria was filled with the silhouette of a monster who would relish in the deed. There was nowhere left for Amanda to flee, and she was too overwhelmed, too afraid in her own mind to try and formulate another escape, conjure up a new location. She was going to die. It was fated, inescapable, her destiny. Her last cognitive thought was one of sheer desperation. Save me. Then the beast was on her. A strong hand gripped her shoulder and wrenched her over onto her back so forcefully that her spine bowed, but she didn't cry out, refused to give her killer the satisfaction. She'd rather die than let this monster believe he'd beaten her, for it was a monster no matter how attractively it costumed it itself. As if that rebellious thought was able to catch form, Amanda was able to suddenly see through the facade, witness the true form of the beast that was about to claim her life. Still male, for there was no mistaking the masculinity that engulfed the dangerous and deadly entity that rose over her to strike. But the strobing flicker of a broken light bulb somewhere on the ceiling overhead made the scales that covered his flesh shimmer incandescent. Gave Amanda the impression that his cold skin was skillfully crafted from the pale pink of coral, intricately decorated by the magnificent blue of cyan and punctuated by the jet of onyx. Such beauty in such a monster that didn't need it. A fresh blast of cold air viciously slapped her hard across the face as if it was punishing her for the slight, daring her to not be afraid. Amanda had no idea how she managed to attribute emotion to the assault, but it smelt like a hard smack of animosity, of pure and unadulterated hatred. There was a flash in the eyes that bored down on her that resembled a violent storm, sparks of lightning crackling across a tumultuous sky, promising so much, but there was no moment of pause, no countdown to thunder. Amanda's heart froze somewhere deep inside of her chest as the beast's curved flat head reared back, and the last flicker of light that she saw glistened off a pair of impossibly long, impossibly sharp-looking serpentine fangs, ready to strike her down. Her body bolted upright. A pair of strong hands gripped her upper arms in an attempt to push her back down, but she fought against them, fought with everything she had, found her voice and used it to scream as loud and emphatically as she could. She didn't want to die, not again, not like this. It didn't matter that the nightmare was gone, that the cold, haunting hall of her father's late home had snapped away, putting her back inside of a cosy lounge, and that she was no longer on the hard tile floor, but on a soft, fluffy white rug, one that she'd willingly laid down on. It didn't matter that the snarling face above her, that had been bearing down on her with frightening menace, was now a face that had never failed to send her heart aflutter, that the form of the beast that she'd stalked and intended to murder had melted away, and in its place was another form, of somebody she loved. It didn't matter that it spoke to her in a voice that she adored, from those lips that she'd kissed, that it called her name over and over again in desperation. None of that mattered, only survival. She needed to regain control. She had to stop it. She had to stop. Amanda, stop. The room had been spinning around her wildly, like she'd been inside of a violent carnival waltzer car, cranked up way too high, but in an instant, as if someone flicked an emergency power switch, everything stopped, and she was finally awake, back in Sebastian Sampson's lounge, where she was safe, where she felt like home, with the wonderful man that she loved and had coaxed her into that sleep that had started off so yummy, like hot chocolate with all the cream and all the marshmallows, only it devolved into a nightmare more brutal than any that she'd recalled having since her father's terrible murder, heralded by a beast that would slaughter them all, as soon as it got the chance to come. To me, Amanda. Are you back? Joe pleaded. Are you with me? Terror clung to her like a sheen of sweat. She panted for breath as if she'd run a marathon, followed by a sprint, followed by a mountain climb, but managed to focus on the face before her, the words it formed. Back in the real world. Safe. She was safe. Alive and safe. She couldn't quite form the words to respond to her boyfriend, to let him know that she could hear and see him, so she nodded and saw relief flood those big chocolate button eyes of his. Only it was relief that didn't last, because she also saw the horror that mirrored her own, and she realised something that she hadn't been aware of as she'd been in the throes of her nightmare. She hadn't been alone. Joe hadn't let her go into this alone, and he'd been almost powerless to help bring her back out into the waking world. But Saga he had, inserting himself in the place of a monster. As Amanda raised a shaking hand to his face, she managed to murmur out the blessed words, "Thank you. Oh God, Joe, thank you." Joe looked momentarily perplexed, but then he nodded and drew her in close, holding her body to his in an embrace that felt like he never wanted to let her go, ever again. She felt him shaking, and it crushed her, drew her out of herself enough so that she could wrap her arms around him and return the hug, assure him they were fine. It had been scary, but they were fine. Over his shoulder, her eyes sought out Sebastian Sampson, who was sitting in the same armchair that he'd started the whole endeavour in, looking as stricken as the pair of them. But of course he would be. He shared a psychic link and bond with Joe that was deep and intricate. Whatever his apprentice had seen, he had surely seen. Whatever the young apprentice had felt, he had surely felt. A terrible experience that had been shared between the three of them, leaving them all rocked to their core. The experiment had gone shockingly awry, and the adept knew, as she did, that what Amanda had experienced the night her father's death was only the start of something new, life-altering, a change within the fabric of a metaphysical makeup that could break her if left to fester. Only he was no longer certain about how they should proceed. The monster in Amanda's nightmare terrified Sebastian Sampson. A terrible potential portent to things to come that she had no personal connection to, but the threat was undeniable and it was real. It had to be. This nightmare was not a product of her grief. Of that, at least, she was certain. The threats that she'd experienced were numerous, and they were terrible. Danger lurked at every turn, and they were all coming, every one. Amanda knew that she could no longer keep these visions to herself. That thought didn't terrify her as much as it ought to have. As much as it seemed to have frightened Joe and his mystical adept. She knew that she had loved ones who'd chosen to walk a dangerous path, but every one of them was strong, powerful, talented. Faced with such odds, it was hard to imagine that any of them might survive the incoming storm, but they were not alone. There was strength in numbers, and if what her sister had said was to be believed, the people that Amanda cared for had an army of skilled otherworldly warriors on standby, waiting for this fight. And they were going to need them, every single one of them. All Amanda needed to do now was be brave, convince the one person in the world who still saw her as their kid sister of what lay ahead, so that they could be prepared for. They could deal with it, for she'd been given a gift in the aftermath of her father's death, a window into the future, and with it she could do the thing that she hadn't been able to do for her father. She could save lives. Nobody else had to die. Not this time. Okay. Chapter 7. So, yeah. Amanda's having more visions and seeing more things. I'm going to leave it to you to interpret what those things could be. I'm not going to give anything away with that one because it will ruin the story if I do. So, there are threats, and there are threats coming, and I think that we've been aware of that from the beginning of the book, but Amanda's had a deeper vision of what potentially is coming and what is on the horizon. So now she needs to do something about it, and it seems that she wants to be able to embrace this gift that's been given to her and hopefully do what she wasn't able to do for her father. So that was chapter 7. I'm going to leave it there. I don't really think that there is anything more that I want to or should say about that, lest I start spoiling things. So, thank you, as always, for watching. This has been Art of War, Hell Hath No Fury. In the next chapter, we will be heading back to Martha and seeing what is going on where they are. And, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join me for the next part. Thank you for watching. Mwah.